Hi, everybody. This is Andrea Widberg, and I am back with the second American Thinker podcast. Between day one and day two, I've thought about it a little, and I have one assurance to give you and one comment about what this podcast will do. The assurance is that we will never change our written content at American Thinker. We will always be a written site. The podcast is not intended to replace anything. It is intended to augment it. The second thing is what I've realized is that there are certain points I want to repeat, even though they're already at the site, because I think they're important. And also there's such a plethora of news out there. There's no way we can get it all at the site in the written content. So this is an opportunity to develop ideas that otherwise just get lost day after day. Having said that, let me begin. The first story is about a NeverTrumper who is coming home. This NeverTrumper is Gordon Sondland, who was, under Trump, the American ambassador to the European Union. He was a witness in the first Trump impeachment during Ukraine. Really unclear to me what his role was. It was a pivotal role. Both sides used what he said. You and I heard the recording of the call, and as far as I'm concerned, there was no quid pro quo there, but he seemed to be bullied into saying that, yeah, maybe there was a quid pro quo, yada, yada. Trump fired him immediately after the impeachment, which is understandable. And then after January 6th, Sondland completely disavowed Trump. But something very interesting happened on MSNBC yesterday. The talking head reminded Sondland of his completely disavowing Trump and then said to Sondland, "Do you stand by that?" And here's Sondland's answer. "No, I don't stand by it. And I'll tell you why. I've now lived 4 years under the Biden-Harris policies, and I have to say that those policies are not only becoming an existential threat to our country's way of life, but to our allies as well." And when he was asked if he would be voting for Trump, he said, and I'm quoting again, "It is a yes for me. It is an absolute yes for me. That is how badly the Biden-Harris team have prosecuted their job." And the talking head said, quote, "But the whole point you seem to be making was that January 6th and that kind of attack on democracy is bigger than any policy difference," close quote, to which Sondland replied, quote, "But I am seeing so many attacks on democracy that eclipse January 6th, close quote. So while I'm not thrilled with this man for his caving on the Ukraine phone call and his accepting the leftist narrative about January 6th, my feeling is that you always welcome people back in the fold when they finally get it right. And Sondland got it right, and what he has to say is worth sharing with any NeverTrumpers you know who need to get over their repugnance about Trump. And this is really important. It's going to be a theme in my next slide, which is about J.D. Vance's response on abortion. Now, I did a post at this at American Thinker, so you're welcome to look at it, where I said he got the tone exactly right. I'd like to reiterate that here. What J.D. realizes, he knew right away going in, because of the two female moderators, that this entire debate was intended to make him and Trump look like crazy, handmaid tale monsters who want to keep women barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. J.D. also understood that even though he's pro-life, he could not in 2 minutes convince women who, as I once was, were marinated in a pro-abortion world that abortion is in fact morally wrong. There's no way you can change people's minds in 2 minutes. There is no magic phrase that will do it. And I developed that in my post as well. What he needed to do was tell women that Trump is not a monster. So the way it works is, as our polling with Rasmussen reports showed, people know two things. They know these as facts. They know that they are much worse off now than they were before. This encompasses everything from the economy to illegal immigration to crime to their children being quote unquote transgendered, as if that were a real thing. And they also know that on all these things, Trump will do better. Those are facts. Those are understanding reality. Those are data points. That is their, as the leftists like to say, lived experience. But the mainstream media has done a superb job of setting up a narrative where Trump is evil. That's a visceral thing, an emotional thing, because the facts don't bear it out. And Kamala is good and filled with joy, and she loves women, and Tim Walz loves women, and Vance is weird. So what J.D. Vance had to do, he could not change minds on the issues, on that visceral emotion. All he could do was try to punch away at the evil and weird. And he did that. In 2 minutes, he was calm. He flashed his beautiful blue eyes. And he said to women, I understand your fear about losing abortion. And it's a state's problem, but what I want to do is make your life better so that you have real choice about having babies. And this is the beginning of coming back at the death cult of leftism. Because abortion is most fundamentally that we have created a death cult society where the environmentalists tell us that human beings are generally parasites on Earth, so we shouldn't reproduce. And they tell women that babies are parasites. And in a way, babies do take away from a woman. They live inside you, they take sustenance from you, and once they're born, your life, if you're not a psychopath, is dedicated to them. But unlike a parasite that leaves you with nothing, babies give you everything. And J.D. Vance wants to change that. If you change that, you change the death cult, and you can reach women rationally about life. So anyway, I thought it was a superb answer, wanted to highlight it. A horrible thing coming out is that Mayorkas has announced that FEMA no longer has enough money for the rest of the year. And we still have a month left in hurricane season, let alone any other natural disasters that might come along. Earthquakes, God forbid, fires, hurricanes, who knows what. Nature is a wild thing. Where did all the money go? It went to illegal aliens who, people in Lahaina and now in North Carolina are getting offered one-time $750 checks for having lost everything. FEMA has been giving massive sums of money to illegal aliens, $2,500 here per month, $2,500 there per month, housing, transportation, cell phones, you name it. Not only does this show where the administration's priorities are, but this is a fraud. And the reason I say that, and I'm getting information from Wikipedia, which is no friend to the conservative view, but Wikipedia states simply about FEMA, quote, the agency's primary purpose is to coordinate the response to a disaster that has occurred in the United States and that overwhelms the resources of local and state authorities, end quote. So, for one thing, once FEMA comes in, what FEMA is admitting is that the open border is a disaster. But there's more to it than that. Let me quote again. The governor of the state in which the disaster occurs must declare a state of emergency and formally request from the president that FEMA and the federal government respond to the disaster, close quote. Now, maybe I'm forgetting something, but I don't recall any state government announcing that the influx of illegal aliens is a disaster that requires FEMA to come in. What this means is that Mayorkas and FEMA raided the Treasury, which is all types of illegal, and in a just world, they would be tried and prosecuted, anyone involved in making this decision, tried and prosecuted and sent to jail. While we're on the subject of what's happening in North Carolina, there are two other squiblets. One is that Federal Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has shut down all flights carrying aid into Western North Carolina, as well as shutting down drones. Now, that's an interesting decision to make because, pardon me, that's, sad news. One of my friends, her father passed away, so I hope all of you will keep her in your prayers. And as soon as this is done, I will immediately reach out to her. But he'd been ill for a while. It was not unexpected, but still sad. So what's happening is that the federal government is not letting any volunteer aid into the affected areas, and they're making sure that people can't see what's going on. Now, one of the theories is that this is an effort to prevent the area from voting. But as my friend who blogs as Anonymy at American Thinker, and ANONY space MEE, she knows things in a way nobody else does. She understands how the government works, and she points out that the single biggest population center in this region is Asheville. So while the counties around it tend to be red, Asheville is the voting heart of the region, and it's went for Biden by 60%. So this probably isn't about keeping the region from voting. So there's a text that's going around by a guy named Ryan Tyre, Tyre, and I don't mean a text, I mean a tweet. And what he says is follow the money. What happens is that FEMA has all sorts of preferred providers who come in whenever there's a disaster, and they don't want anybody horning in on the monopoly. And I don't know it's because they're taking a cut from the preferred providers, or if the preferred providers are putting pressure on them and say they'll walk away, or if FEMA's saying, well, we just have to do it the bureaucratic way, or if this is preserving a power base. But this is the level of corruption that they would rather see people have no water, no food, no communication, and maintain the rigidity and possibly the profitability of the monopoly they have. I spoke yesterday about what's going on in Israel. I continue to hope that the Israel ignores Biden telling Israel not to harm Iran's nuclear program, because that nuclear program has a nuclear-tipped weapon aimed at Israel and probably aimed at America too. And for the American president to say, don't attack it, when Iran has explicitly been at war with us since 1979 is beyond insane. But Biden is demented and the administration is evil, and that's where we are. But what I have on the screen, if you can see it, and I'll describe it if you can't, is a picture of the 8 Israeli soldiers who died yesterday or early today in Lebanon. Young men, all in their early 20s. And what I see when I look at them, and it repeats a theme I've seen since Nova, is that Israelis are gorgeous. They are objectively gorgeous people. And they are probably the most, quote unquote, mutt nation in the world, meaning the intermarriage, because they represent people coming from Europe, the Ashkenazi Jews, and then they represent the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, which come from across the Middle East and from, say, Spain and Portugal. So you're getting blonde-haired, blue-eyed, all the way to the Africans from Ethiopia. And this is the way you do immigration, because what happens is common culture, they're all assimilated. When you arrive in Israel, you have to go to an Ulpan where you learn Hebrew and you learn Israeli culture. And at the schools, they teach religion. Even the secular people have to learn religion. And they intermarry like crazy because the military is a giant melting pot. And so you have a beautiful fusion of people of all races coming together in a common culture. And what we have in America and in Europe is backwards. It's the exact opposite. We drive people apart culturally and focus obsessively on racial characteristics. We are deliberately creating destructive balkanization, and it makes people ugly inside and out. Israel is the model for powerful immigration and assimilation. And I can assure you that the Ethiopian Jews in their own homes still practice the Jewish traditions in their cultural Ethiopian way, but they are still dominantly Jewish and Israeli. And when they get married out of Ethiopian race and have children with some Ashkenazi Jew who's Snow White, the children are dazzlingly beautiful and they blend their cultures. Next point is about the fact that Jack Smith filed a motion against Donald Trump, and Judge Tanya Chutkin, released the motion. It has to do with trying to work around the fact that the Supreme Court said that the president has immunity for acts taken within the scope of his presidency. So what Smith did was he gathered together a whole bunch of random information and said, well, none of this was within the scope of his presidency. I haven't read the 136 pages. Apparently, most of it is garbage, both factually and legally. But the reality is, even if there's a germ of truth in it, the filing was done so that there's no time for Trump to do a reply before the election, which means that the only thing out there is Jack Smith's version of events, his funhouse, Alice in Wonderland, crazy, perverted, biased version. And it would have been one thing if he filed it, but that Chutkan released it is about as clear a type of election interference as you will find. Last thing I want to talk about, this is just so crazy. So CBS used to be, remember, if you're old enough, you remember back in the days, the 60s, when CBS was kind of Middle America's channel. It had Green Acres and all these shows that were for Middle America. And then they got edgy with the Norman Lear stuff, with All in the Family and Maude. And now CBS Morning News, on a segment called The State of Spirituality, had an it person. I'm pretty sure it is a woman who's taken testosterone, because it has that weird epicene voice where you really can't tell. But the neck is a female neck, unless it's an exceptionally effeminate man. It is the destruction of a human being. It's also a Lutheran pastor. And when the CBS interviewer said, well, some people point to the Bible saying that God made man and woman, this it person said, quote, "It's hard to relate it to modern day times because it wasn't written for 2024, referring to the Bible. It was written for then. When we read in the scripture that God created man and woman, yes, and God created everyone else as well." So it's still shocking that CBS News ran this. It's not MSNBC, not CNN. But the other thing is that this so perfectly exemplifies leftism and religion. For truly, because the leftists love to say that conservatives aren't really religious because they turn away illegal aliens and they don't support abortion, and God would have wanted all that. So conservatives take the Bible as written, and admittedly they soften things. We don't look for witches in every corner. We don't burn witches. We don't execute homosexuals. So we have softened it around the edges. But the core principles, such as God created man and woman, remain untouched. To conservatives, God is the creator, the giver of morals, and the arbiter of how we understand the world around us. For leftists, God is just another tool in the leftist toolbox. And just as a reminder, in the Soviet Union, they still boasted about having churches. It was just that the state controlled the church. So what you're seeing with this weird it person is what happens when you have no First Amendment. Because if there were no First Amendment, and that is something the Democrat Party really wants, this it person will tell you how to understand the Bible. And on that note, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I will try to be back on a regular, if not a daily basis. Sometimes my days get very chaotic with these snippets.